The galactic arena thrummed with energy, a chaotic symphony of light and sound reverberating through the massive structure. Thousands of spectators from across the known universe filled the stands, their roars blending into a deafening wave that pulsed against the reinforced walls. Jackson Jax, Ryder, Earth's unassuming entrant, trailed behind a sleek, silver-skinned attendant as they navigated the competitor's entrance. His practiced expression of wide-eyed unmasked the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a product of years spent in Earth's most brutal special forces training. The sensory overload of alien cheers, flashing holograms, and the faint hum of advanced machinery barely fazed him. This was no ordinary mission, and he was no ordinary man. Jack stood at 6 feet, his frame lean yet solid, wrapped in a simple gray combat suit that clung to his body without ostentation. His short black hair was tousled, his gray eyes sharp but deliberately softened for the moment, playing the part of a bewildered human stepping into a world far beyond his own. Scars crisscrossed his arms and back beneath the fabric, silent stories of survival etched into his skin from battles no one here could imagine. He was Earth's hidden weapon, sent to observe, adapt, and, if necessary, disrupt the contest of champions from within. "Human, you will wait here until called," the attendant said, its voice a metallic chirp as it gestured to a holding area bustling with other competitors. "Try not to disgrace your species too swiftly." The creature's silver lips curled into a sneer, its elongated fingers twitching with disdain. Jax ducked his head, hunching his shoulders slightly to shrink his presence. "Thank you," he murmured, his tone meek. "I'll do my best." The attendant snorted and turned away, leaving him alone to assess the competition. Through lowered lashes, Jax scanned the room. 12 warriors from the galaxy's fiercest cultures filled the space, each radiating a deadly aura. A hulking, four-armed giant with stone-gray skin flexed its muscles, performing one-handed push-ups that sent faint tremors through the floor. Nearby, a serpentine figure with shimmering metallic scales twirled a curved blade with hypnotic precision, its forked tongue flicking the air. These were the champions Ambassador Damian Voss had warned him about, formidable, ruthless, and utterly convinced of their superiority. "Perfect. Attention, competitors!" A voice boomed over the arena's comm system, deep and resonant. "The selection ceremony begins in 2 cycles. Prepare to meet your challengers." Jax rolled his shoulders, feeling the subtle weight of the subdermal transmitter nestled between his shoulder blades. His mission was clear: gather intelligence on alien military capabilities, survive long enough to report back, and let the galaxy underestimate humanity's potential. Earth's brass didn't expect him to win. Neither did the other competitors. That was his edge, and he intended to wield it like a blade. The silver-skinned attendant returned, ushering the warriors through a towering doorway into the main arena. The crowd's roar hit Jax like a physical blow, a tidal wave of sound that threatened to drown out his thoughts. Holographic displays flickered to life above the central platform, projecting each contestant's image in vivid detail. At the platform's heart stood Magistrate Clyon, a wiry alien with translucent skin and eyes that shifted colors with his mood, currently a deep violet of ceremonial gravity. "Welcome, warriors of the galaxy, to the 73rd Contest of Champions." Clyon's voice carried without amplification, slicing through the noise. "Today begins the test of skill, strength, and cunning that will crown the next guardian of the 5 systems." Jax kept his gaze low, cataloging exits, guard posts, and the faint shimmer of security fields woven into the arena's design. He played the overwhelmed human perfectly, even as his mind raced with calculations. Then Clyon's voice shifted, drawing his attention. "As tradition dictates, our returning champion has first selection of opponents." That's when Jax saw her. She emerged from the shadows like a predator stepping into the light, every movement fluid and deliberate. Vera of Zalara, the undefeated warrior of her people, was a vision of lethal beauty. At 5'10", her silver-toned skin gleamed under the arena's lights, accentuating a body that was both powerful and impossibly alluring. Full chest, narrow waist, hips that flared into long, sculpted legs. Her deep purple hair cascaded down her back, framing pointed, feline ears that twitched with every sound. Golden eyes glowed with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the chaos, and faint luminescent markings pulsed along her high cheekbones and slender neck, flaring brighter as she surveyed the competition. Her battle armor hugged her form like a second skin, practical yet designed to emphasize every curve, and a massive energy axe strapped to her back hummed faintly, a weapon as breathtaking as its wielder. "Champion Vera of Zalara," Clyon announced, his eyes flickering to a curious orange. "You may make your selection." Vera stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the assembled warriors with open contempt. The crowd hushed, hanging on her choice. Her eyes skimmed past Jax, then snapped back, locking onto him with predatory focus. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face, revealing sharp canines that glinted in the light. "I select the human," she declared, her voice smooth and low, laced with a purring undertone that sent an unexpected shiver down Jax's spine. Murmurs rippled through the arena, punctuated by chuckles from the other competitors. The four-armed giant let out a booming laugh, its granite fists thudding against the floor. Even the serpentine warrior hissed in amusement, its blade pausing mid-twirl. "Are you certain, champion?" Clyon asked, his eyes shifting to a concerned yellow. "The human contestant is untested." "Precisely," Vera replied, circling Jax like a hunter sizing up prey. "My world has heard tales of these humans, how they've clawed their way across their little system, how they dare claim a place among us." She stopped in front of him, close enough that he caught the faint scent of her, a heady mix of spice and something electric, like a storm about to break. "I wish to crush these claims myself." Jax kept his breathing steady, his posture submissive. Let her underestimate him. It's what everyone did. It's why he'd survived 15 years of missions that should have killed him. "Human, do you accept Champion Vera's challenge?" Clyon asked, his gaze settling on Jax. He glanced up, meeting Vera's golden eyes for a fleeting second before dropping his head again. "I don't really have a choice, do I?" he said, his voice soft but tinged with a dry edge. "He has a tongue, at least," Vera said, her smile widening as the crowd laughed. "Perhaps he'll last longer than a single blow." "Very well," Clyon announced, his eyes turning a formal green. "The selection is made. Champion Vera of Zalara and Jackson of Earth will compete in the first challenge tomorrow at dawn. The rules are absolute. Each trial tests a true champion's mettle: combat, survival, intellect, and adaptation. Victory demands success. Failure means elimination." As the ceremony continued with other pairings, Vera lingered near Jax. The narrow walkway forced her to brush past him, and as she did, her armored shoulder grazed his chest. In the tight space, his arm pressed briefly against her side, the curve of her chest unmistakable even through the plating. Jax's breath hitched, a flicker of heat racing through him before he clamped it down. Vera paused, her ears twitching as she glanced back. "Watch yourself, human," she murmured, her voice low and teasing, though her eyes held a spark of something more. Curiosity, perhaps. "Most of your kind wouldn't survive a heartbeat in my world." Jax met her gaze this time, letting just a hint of defiance slip through his mask. "Most of your kind haven't seen what humans can do," he replied, his tone quiet but firm. Something flickered in Vera's expression, surprise, maybe even intrigue, before her contemptuous smirk returned. "Bold words. I'll enjoy testing them tomorrow." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, her purple hair brushing his shoulder. "Try to make it worth my time." She turned away, her stride confident as she departed, leaving Jax with a lingering scent of her presence. Only then did Ambassador Damien Voss approach, his diplomatic smile as cold as his pale blue eyes. The older man adjusted his silver-threaded cloak, his voice smooth but edged with calculation. "Making friends already, I see." Voss said, his tone dripping with false warmth. She picked me because she thinks I'm weak, Jax replied softly, his eyes tracking Vera's retreating form. Every step a study in grace and danger. And are you? Voss pressed, his gaze narrowing. Jax allowed himself a faint smile, just enough to keep her guessing. Later, alone in his quarters, Jax shed his tunic, revealing a body mapped with scars, each a testament to missions where death had been a whisper away. He studied the holographic briefing for tomorrow's challenge, combat in shifting gravity fields. Champion Vera, he thought, pulling up her records, undefeated across 17 systems, a master of 11 weapon forms, tactically brilliant. This mission had just gotten a hell of a lot more interesting. Sleep came easily, his training silencing the noise in his mind. His last thought before darkness claimed him was of golden eyes and purple hair, and the strange certainty that tomorrow would change everything. The artificial dawn broke over the galactic arena with a soft golden glow, the station's programmed lighting shifting from starry black to a warm, deceptive calm. Jax. Ryder had been awake for hours, his body moving through a series of precise stretches in the dim confines of his quarters. To any onlooker, the motions might have seemed casual, an anxious human preparing for an impossible fight, but every twist and flex was calculated, warming muscles honed by years of covert operations. He tugged on the simple gray combat suit Earth had provided, its snug fit revealing the lean strength beneath his scarred skin, though he kept his posture slouched to maintain the facade. A sharp rap at the door interrupted his routine. "Human, your presence is required in the preparation chamber," a metallic voice announced. Jax draped a loose shirt over his torso, concealing the evidence of his past, and stepped into the bustling corridor. Technical crews darted about, their alien tools clattering, while media drones buzzed overhead, capturing every moment for the billions watching across the galaxy. Betting agents shouted odds, and Jax caught his name paired with dismal numbers. A long shot, just as he'd intended. The preparation chamber hummed with tension. Competitors adjusted armor and tested weapons, their mentors barking last-minute advice in guttural tongues. Jax stood alone, projecting the nervous fidgeting of an outmatched rookie. A lilac-skinned technician approached, offering him a small metallic disc. "Your environment stabilizer," it said, blinking multiple eyelids. "The challenge features shifting gravity fields. This prevents immediate collapse, but offers no edge in combat." Jax attached the disc to his forearm, noting how its placement restricted his wrist mobility, a subtle handicap, perhaps intentional. "Thanks," he said, feigning uncertainty. "How will I know when the gravity changes?" "You'll feel it, human," the technician replied, its tone dry. Most profoundly. Across the chamber, the air seemed to shift as Vera of Zalara entered, flanked by two Zilloran attendants with shimmering silver skin like hers. Her battle armor gleamed under the lights, a form-fitting exoskeleton that amplified her strength while accentuating every curve. Full chest, taut waist, hips that swayed with predatory grace. Her deep purple hair was pulled into an intricate braid, exposing the sharp points of her feline ears, and the luminescent markings on her face pulsed faintly, syncing with her heartbeat. The energy axe at her back crackled with a low hum, its edge glowing faintly blue. When her golden eyes found Jax, her lips curled into that same wicked smile from the ceremony, sharp canines glinting. She dismissed her attendants with a flick of her wrist and strode toward him, her steps deliberate and fluid. Jax kept his head slightly bowed, but his peripheral vision tracked her approach. "You slept well, human?" she asked, her voice carrying that purring undertone that sent an involuntary shiver through him. "Well enough," he replied, letting a hint of genuine appreciation slip into his tone as he glanced up. "Your reputation's hard to ignore, Champion Vera. I studied your victories last night." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Did you learn anything useful?" "That I should have said no to this fight," he said with a self-deprecating smile, hiding the steel beneath. Vera laughed, the sound musical yet edged with danger. "Too late for that." She stepped closer, her scent, spice and ozone, wrapping around him as she examined him with unabashed curiosity. "You're kinda odd. So fragile-looking, yet you've survived a world with beasts that would shred most here." Her fingers brushed his forearm where the stabilizer sat, her claws extending just enough to graze his skin without breaking it. "Your tech is crude, your body soft. But I admire your nerve." Jax's pulse quickened at the touch, though he kept his expression neutral. Before he could respond, Magistrate Clyon's voice cut through the chamber. "Contestants, take your positions." Vera's gaze sharpened into focus, her smile fading to a look of pure determination. "Try to last 5 minutes, human," she said, her tone a mix of challenge and tease. "For your species' pride." He nodded meekly as she turned away, her confident stride carrying her toward the arena gate. Only then did Jax allow himself a small, knowing grin. The arena had transformed overnight. The ceremonial platform was gone, replaced by a vast circular field divided into 6 glowing sections, each marked by floating indicators of shifting gravity, ranging from featherlight to triple Earth's pull. Clyon stood on an elevated platform, his translucent skin shimmering with excitement. "Citizens of the 5 systems, welcome to the first challenge," he declared, the crowd roaring in response. "Today's test, combat adaptability. Our champions must navigate changing gravity while neutralizing combat drones. The first to destroy 15 advances." Jax scanned the layout, noting the triple gravity zone positioned to favor Vera's agility. He stepped to his illuminated starting circle, gripping the standard-issue shock staff Earth had provided, a basic weapon, its tip crackling faintly. Across the field, Vera drew her energy axe in one fluid motion, the blade igniting with a sharp hum that cut through the air. Their eyes met briefly, hers gleaming with anticipation. "Begin," Clyon shouted. Vera launched forward like a bolt of lightning, her body a blur as she cleaved the first drone in half before it could activate its defenses. Sparks flew, and the crowd erupted. Jax moved more cautiously, letting his staff drag slightly, as if unsure how to wield it. He stumbled into the first gravity shift, half Earth's pull, and dropped to one knee, the staff clattering beside him. Laughter rippled through the stands. Ambassador Voss, watching from a private box, pinched the bridge of his nose, his silver hair glinting under the lights. A drone buzzed toward Jax, its weapon ports glowing red. He fumbled with the staff, accidentally triggering its shock function as the machine closed in. The jolt fried the drone's circuits, sending it crashing in a shower of sparks. "The human scores his first point," the announcer called, surprise lacing his voice. 14 more to go. If he survives." Vera was already on her 5th drone, her movements a deadly ballet. She leapt between gravity fields, using the shifts to propel her strikes with devastating force. Jax engaged his 2nd drone, stepping into the triple gravity zone. The sudden weight crushed down on him, and even with his training, he staggered, his knees buckling for real. The drone seized the moment, charging its energy pulse. Jax made a split-second call. Cover was critical, but survival trumped it. He rolled aside, the pulse scorching the ground where he'd stood, and swung his staff up in a clumsy arc that deflected the next shot back at the drone, disabling it. Across the arena, Vera paused, her golden eyes narrowing at his maneuver. The crowd murmured, caught off guard by the human's unexpected resilience. Jax followed with a sloppy thrust that barely clipped his 3rd drone, reinforcing the narrative of dumb luck. Then came the test he'd been waiting for. Vera, confident in her lead, now at 10 drones, entered the central field where gravity fluctuated unpredictably. As she adjusted to a sudden drop, 2 drones converged on her from opposite sides. She spun to bisect the first, her axe blazing, but the second slipped in her blind spot, its weapon glowing ominously. Without thinking, Jax acted. He hurled his staff with pinpoint accuracy, the weapon spiraling through the shifting gravity and slamming into the 2nd drone just as it fired. The pulse missed Vera by inches, sizzling into the ground. The arena fell silent, every eye on the human who'd just saved the champion. Vera froze, her head snapping toward Jax, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. Jax scrambled to retrieve his staff, deliberately tripping as he crossed another gravity threshold. He hit the ground hard, rolling awkwardly to sell the fluke. The crowd's laughter returned, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Vasa's cold eyes bored into him from above. Vera destroyed her final drones with renewed fury, finishing with 15 in record time. Jax managed 9, an impressive tally for a supposed novice, but no match for her. Victory to champion Vera, Clyon announced to thunderous applause. But advancement for Jackson of Earth, who survives to the next challenge. As they exited the arena, Vera intercepted Jax in the dim preparation chamber. Her eyes burned with intensity, her braids swaying as she closed the distance. "That throw," she said, her voice sharp. "Explain it." "Beginner's luck," Jax shrugged, keeping his tone light. She stepped closer, her scent enveloping him, spice and storm. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with startling strength, her claws brushing his skin. "I've fought in hundreds of battles. Luck doesn't account for gravity shifts with that precision." Her grip tightened, her body inches from his, and, as she leaned in, her chest pressed briefly against his arm through her armor. The contact was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through Jax's nerves. "You're hiding something human." He let a flicker of admiration show in his gray eyes. "You're sharp, champion Vera. Maybe I'm just full of surprises." Her ears twitched forward, her gaze lingering on him with newfound interest. "And you're slippery, Jackson of Earth." She released his wrist but stayed close, studying him. "Perhaps there's more to your kind than our scouts think. Maybe there's more to this game than either of us knows," he countered softly, his voice low enough to draw her in. Her markings pulsed brighter for a moment, a sign of heightened attention. Before she could press further, Voss appeared, his diplomatic entourage in tow. "Quite a show, Mr. Ryder," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Earth is proud." Vera stepped back, her expression cooling to neutrality. "Your human has unexpected qualities, Ambassador. I'll look forward to testing them further." As she departed, she cast Jax a final glance, suspicion and intrigue warring in her golden eyes. Back in his quarters, Jax received a secure transmission from Earth Command. "Assessment proceeding as planned," he replied. "They still underestimate us, but Vera's starting to see through the act." "Maintain cover," came the terse response. "Primary objective, intelligence." As the line cut off, Jax's thoughts drifted to Vera, her strength, her grace, the heat of her touch. Tomorrow's challenge would demand even more careful play, and something told him those golden eyes would miss nothing. The night passed in restless quiet, the hum of the galactic arena's systems a constant undercurrent in Jax Ryder's quarters. Sleep had come, but it was shallow, his mind replaying the day's events. Vera's piercing golden eyes, the weight of her grip on his wrist, the electric brush of her body against his. He rose before the artificial dawn, his gray gaze steady as he reviewed the next challenge's briefing on a flickering holographic display. Survival. 2 square kilometers of engineered terrain, jungle, rock, and swamp, designed to kill the careless. No weapons beyond a utility blade, no food, no tech beyond a basic bodysuit. 6 hours to reach the extraction point. Simple, brutal, and perfectly suited to his training. He slipped into the thin survival gear, its fabric clinging to his scarred frame like a second skin, offering minimal protection but enough flexibility for what lay ahead. The corridor outside buzzed with activity as he made his way to the arena, media drones darting overhead, their lenses glinting like predatory eyes. Competitors gathered at their entry points, their silhouettes stark against the sprawling terrain unfolding beyond the gates. Jax spotted Vera 3 positions to his right, her silver skin catching the light as she adjusted her own bodysuit. Her purple hair was bound tightly against her head, accentuating the sharp lines of her face and the pulsing glow of her markings. Even in the standardized gear, She exuded deadly confidence, her curves undeniable beneath the taut fabric. Their eyes met across the distance, and she offered a slight nod, a warrior's acknowledgement, not a taunt. Jax returned it, his expression carefully neutral, though his pulse quickened at the memory of her closeness in the preparation chamber. Magistrate Clyon's voice broke the moment, resonating through the arena. The rules are simple. Reach the extraction point within 6 hours while maintaining life functions. Environmental hazards are real and lethal. Combat between contestants is permitted but not required. A cacophony of sounds erupted as the arena's systems roared to life. Rustling leaves, distant roars, the hiss of steam from hidden vents. The air thickened with moisture and alien scents, a prelude to the chaos within. Jax assessed his options. The swamp offered the fastest route but teemed with danger. The jungle promised cover but slowed progress. Most competitors angled for the jungle's edge, their footsteps crunching against the perimeter. Jax hesitated for the cameras, playing the uncertain novice, then stumbled toward the jungle, only to trigger a sensor that unleashed a cloud of stinging insects. He flailed dramatically, swatting at the swarm as he veered into a narrow ravine leading toward the swamp. A calculated misstep, perfectly executed. 30 minutes in, Jax navigated the swamp's edge with precision honed on Earth's deadliest terrains. He sidestepped gas pockets by tracking the skittering of local bugs, tested the ground with his blade rather than his weight. Each move masked with just enough awkwardness to maintain his cover. The air was thick, sulfuric, clinging to his skin like a damp shroud. A sudden splash to his left snapped his focus to the murky water, ripples spreading too wide to be natural. Someone else had chosen the swamp. He slipped behind a cluster of phosphorescent fungi, their tendrils swaying as he steadied his breathing. Through the glowing fronds, he saw her, Vera, emerging from the water, her bodysuit slick with oily residue, silver skin glistening in the dim light. She moved with the ease of someone born to such environments, her ears swiveling independently as she scanned for threats. Her nostrils flared, sampling the air, and Jax tensed. His scent control techniques were top tier, but Zillerin's senses were an unknown variable. Her head turned sharply toward his hiding spot. "I know you're there, human," she said, her voice low and firm. "Your heartbeat betrays you." Jax weighed his options: stay hidden and risk her closing in, or step out and control the encounter. He chose the latter, emerging with his hands raised slightly, utility blade dangling loosely. "Is that another Zillerin trick they left out of the species files?" he asked, keeping his tone light, a faint grin tugging at his lips. A smirk flickered across her face, softening her predatory edge. "Perhaps." She gestured to the swamp around them, her movements fluid despite the treacherous ground. "Most avoid this route, yet here you are." "Got chased by bugs," Jack shrugged, scratching his neck for effect. "Seems safer than being stung to death." "A fortunate blunder," she said, her golden eyes narrowing. She didn't buy it, not fully. This path is quicker, though few survive it without training in toxic wastelands. A distant bellow cut through their exchange, the ground trembling beneath their feet. "Swamp Leviathan," Vera said tersely, her ears twitching. "We should move." "Separately." "Wait," Jack said, his gaze dropping to her right leg. She favored it subtly, a hitch in her stride he'd clocked the moment she emerged. He pointed to a purple sheen clinging to her calf, viscous and faintly glowing. "That's Mever poison. Numbs first, then paralyzes. You've got 20 minutes before that leg gives out." Surprise flashed across her features, her markings flaring briefly. "How does a human know Mever venom on sight?" "Studied xenobiology before Earth's defense forces," Jax replied, offering a half-truth that rolled off his tongue. "It's like some coral toxins back home." The tremors intensified, the Leviathan closing in. "We need to neutralize it fast," he added, scanning their surroundings. His eyes landed on a cluster of blue-veined plants near the shoreline, half submerged. "They are Talon reeds. Their sap counters the neurotoxins." Vera's gaze followed his, suspicion tightening her jaw. "You're remarkably well-versed in alien flora for a lottery pick who's never left Earth." The ground lurched, nearly pitching them into the muck. A massive tentacle broke the surface 20 meters away, thrashing the water into froth. "Debate my resume later," Jack said, flashing a wry grin. "Come on." With a grudging nod, Vera followed him to the reeds. Jax harvested several stems, splitting them with his blade to reveal the milky sap. "This'll burn," he warned, kneeling beside her. "Just do it," she hissed, her eyes locked on the approaching Leviathan, its bulk displacing waves that lapped at their boots. Jax worked fast, his fingers steady despite the stakes. He applied the sap to the wound, spreading it across the purple stain on her calf. As he did, Vera shifted to steady herself, and his hand brushed upward, skimming the swell of her chest through the damp bodysuit. The contact was brief, accidental, but the softness beneath the fabric sent a jolt through him, his breath catching. Her golden eyes snapped to his, wide with a mix of surprise and something hotter, anger, maybe, or intrigue. "Your hands tremble, human," she murmured, her voice low, a faint purr underscoring the words. "Adrenaline," he shot back, forcing a sheepish grin as he pulled away, though his pulse hammered in his ears. The sap hissed against her skin, and she bit back a wince, her markings flaring brighter with the pain. "We need higher ground," she said, her tone taut but controlled as she tested her leg. The trembling earth urged them on, the Leviathan's roars growing louder. "There's a rock formation 300 meters east. It'll hold." Jax nodded, and they moved together, their steps sinking with surprising ease. The swamp fought them every inch, mud sucking at their boots, waves crashing against their thighs, but Vera's strength and Jax's instincts kept them ahead of the beast. As they reached the outcropping, a tentacle lashed out, forcing them to scramble up the rocks in a rush. Jax boosted Vera ahead, his hands gripping her hips to lift her, fingers pressing into the firm curve of her backside for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She glanced back, her ears twitching, but said nothing as she hauled him up after her. They collapsed onto a small plateau, breathing hard, the Leviathan's pursuit marked only by ripples below. "Your treatment worked," Vera said, flexing her leg experimentally. She fixed him with a stare, her golden eyes unnerving in their intensity. "Lucky guess." "Educated one." Jax deflected, wiping sweat from his brow. "You don't strike me as someone who trusts luck, though." "Nor do you, Jackson of Earth," she replied, her voice softening as she studied him. "Your file claims a lottery chose you, yet you wield skills no random pick should have: combat, biology, survival." He met her gaze, letting a flicker of truth show. "Maybe Earth rigged the odds a little." "A deception," she said, though her tone held no judgment, only curiosity. She shifted closer, her scent wrapping around him again, and for a moment, the swamp faded, leaving just the two of them on that rocky perch, the air thick with unspoken questions. The swamp stretched out beneath them, a murky expanse of bubbling pools and swaying reeds, its surface rippling with the Leviathan's unseen movements. Jax. Ryder leaned against the rough edge of the rocky plateau, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Beside him, Vera of Zalara flexed her newly treated leg, the purple sheen of Mever poison fading under the Toulon sap's effect. Her golden eyes lingered on him, sharp and searching, the faint glow of her facial markings casting a soft light across her silver skin. The air between them crackled, not with the swamp's humidity, but with something unspoken, a thread of tension weaving tighter with every glance. "An interesting deception," Vera said, her voice low, almost playful as she broke the silence. She gestured toward the distant extraction point, now faintly visible through the haze. "We have 3 hours left. The ridge eastward, then down near the thermal vents. That's the fastest route." Jax raised an eyebrow, wiping mud from his utility blade. "You suggesting we stick together, champion?" Her expression flickered, unreadable for a moment, then settled into a faint smirk. A temporary alliance of convenience. This challenge doesn't demand we kill each other, only that we survive. And you've proven useful. Her ears twitched forward, a sign of focus, though her gaze held a glint of curiosity that hadn't been there before. Fair enough, Jax replied, holstering his blade. Lead the way. They descended the outcropping with cautious steps, the swamp's tremors fading as the Leviathan lost interest. For the next 2 hours, they traversed the rugged terrain in near silence, their movements falling into an instinctive rhythm. Where Vera's agility let her scale rocky inclines with feline grace, Jax's analytical, I spotted hazards. Hidden sinkholes, clusters of venomous vines, steering them clear with quiet gestures. The jungle gave way to jagged cliffs, then a steaming field of thermal vents, each step drawing them closer to the extraction point. The vents loomed ahead, a treacherous maze of fissures spewing superheated steam in unpredictable bursts. Vera paused at the edge, her braids swaying as she studied the shifting patterns. This is the worst of it, she said, her voice tight. The eruptions are erratic. Timing's everything. Jax nodded, crouching beside her to watch the steam plumes. If we map the sequence for a few minutes, we might find a safe path. No time, she countered, glancing at the holographic timer projected above them. 48 minutes remained. The extraction windows closing. Then we make our own way, Jax said, retrieving a handful of loose stones from the ground. Trigger the vents deliberately. It could depressurize the next ones long enough to cross. Vera's eyes narrowed, then widened with a spark of appreciation. Risky, she said, her purr returning, but clever. Sometimes the safest routes through the fire, he replied, meeting her gaze with a faint grin. They worked fast, hurling stones into the field with calculated precision. Each hit sparked a chain reaction. Steam exploded upward, hissing and billowing, opening brief gaps in the chaos. Now, Jax shouted, and they sprinted into the fray. The air turned thick, blinding, the heat searing their skin through the bodysuits. A plume erupted to Jax's left, and he stumbled, losing sight of Vera in the white haze. Then her hand shot out, gripping his arm with fierce strength, her fingers digging into his bicep as she yanked him forward. The contact was sudden, urgent. Her chest pressed against his side as she pulled him through the steam, her body a solid anchor in the chaos. Jax's hand instinctively slid to her waist, brushing the curve of her hip through the slick fabric, the firmness beneath sending a jolt up his spine. Her breath hitched, audible even over the vents, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked, hers molten gold, his storm gray, both wide with adrenaline and something deeper. Don't fall behind, she growled, though her voice trembled slightly, her grip tightening before she released him. They emerged from the steam cloud battered, but intact, the extraction point now a stone's throw away. 3 other contestants had already arrived, their silhouettes hazy through the lingering mist, with more approaching from the jungle's edge. Jax and Vera stood shoulder to shoulder, their breathing ragged, mud and sweat streaking their faces. We should split now, she said, her tone clipped. Too much cooperation looks suspicious. Agreed, Jax said, though his chest tightened at the thought. But I'll admit, this was educational. A genuine smile broke across her face, softening her sharp features and lighting her markings with a warm glow. Perhaps humans aren't as dull as I thought, she said, extending her arm in a warrior's clasp. Jax took it, his fingers wrapping around her forearm, feeling the controlled power in her grip and the heat of her skin through the damp suit. The contact lingered, her thumb brushing his wrist, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through him. Until the next challenge, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, before she deliberately slowed her pace, letting him cross the finish line first. The crowd's reaction was a mixed roar, surprise, confusion, scattered cheers, as Jax stepped onto the extraction platform. He caught sight of Ambassador Damien Voss in the diplomatic box, his silver hair stark against the dark backdrop, his polite applause failing to mask a thunderous scowl. Vera joined moments later, her stride casual but her eyes flicking toward Jax with a knowing glint. In the recovery chamber, medical techs swarmed the contestants, scanning for injuries and toxins. Jax sat on a bench, letting a drone buzz over his arm, when Voss cornered him in a shadowed alcove. "You're drawing too much attention," the ambassador hissed, his blue eyes icy. The mission was to observe and report, not play hero with an alien champion. Survival demanded it. Jax replied evenly, his face a mask of calm. "I'm still in the game. That's what counts. Your job is to follow orders." Voss snapped, his voice low and venomous. "Tomorrow's combat trial will test you head-on. Perform well enough to stay alive, but not enough to stand out. And stay away from that Zillerin unless forced." "Clear. Crystal," Jack said, his tone flat as Voss stormed off. Across the chamber, Vera spoke with an elderly Zillerin clad in flowing robes. Elder Sarks, if Jax's intel was right. The elder's gestures were sharp, her voice a stern murmur, and Vera's posture stiffened under the scrutiny. Their eyes met briefly across the room, a silent understanding passing between them, both bound by pressures beyond the arena's walls. That night, Jax reviewed the combat trial's parameters in his quarters, the holographic display casting blue light across his scarred chest. A secure transmission crackled through his subdermal receiver. Analysis of survival challenge shows excessive skill. Earth Command's voice said, clipped and cold. "Explain." "Building trust with a key asset," Jax replied, choosing his words with care. "The Zillerin champion has tech and intel beyond our briefings. She's a door to more than we expected." A pause, then, "Proceed with caution. Primary mission is intelligence, not alliances." As the line went dead, Jax's thoughts drifted to Vera, the strength in her grip as she'd pulled him through the steam, the way her body had pressed against his, perfectly calibrated yet unguarded. Tomorrow's trial would pit them against each other in direct combat, a clash he couldn't avoid. The thought stirred a tangle of emotions, respect, anticipation, and something he couldn't name, something that had no place in a covert operative's world. He pushed it down, labeling it professional admiration, nothing more. Sleep eluded him longer than usual, his dreams fractured with flashes of silver skin and golden eyes, the scent of spice and ozone lingering like a ghost. When he finally drifted off, it was with the certainty that Vera would be watching his every move tomorrow, and that he'd have to balance revelation and restraint more carefully than ever. The artificial morning arrived with a harsh shift of light in Jax Ryder's quarters, the golden glow slicing through the haze of his uneasy dreams. He jolted awake, the scent of spice and ozone fading from his senses as the reality of the day settled in. The combat trial loomed, a direct clash with Vera of Zillara, a test of strength and skill that would force him to walk a razor's edge between competence and concealment. He rose, his scarred body moving with practiced efficiency as he donned Earth's lightweight combat suit. Mid-tier gear, deliberately unremarkable, its snug fit outlining his lean frame without betraying the power beneath. His shock baton and 3 concussive charges sat on the table, a modest arsenal that screamed Underdog to anyone watching. The corridor to the preparation chamber buzzed with nervous energy, the air thick with the clatter of armor and the low growl of alien tongues. Jax kept his head down, playing the anxious human as he entered the chamber. Competitors adjusted their gear, some hefting massive blades, others calibrating energy shields, while mentors barked orders. Jax methodically checked his baton, its faint hum a familiar comfort, when a purring voice cut through the din. "Underwhelming weapons for humanity's champion," Vera said, her tone laced with amusement as she approached. Her Zillerin exoskeleton gleamed, a masterpiece of form and function that hugged her silver skin, accentuating her full chest, narrow waist, and powerful hips. Her purple braids swung with each step, her golden eyes glinting as she sized him up. The energy axe at her side pulsed with a faint blue glow, a weapon as stunning as she was. "We work with what we've got," Jax replied, flashing a self-deprecating smile. Not all of us have centuries of tech to lean on. True, she conceded, stepping closer to inspect his gear. Her scent, spice and storm, wrapped around him again, stirring memories of the swamp. Though I wonder if this reflects Earth's limits, or just what they're willing to show. Her claws brushed his baton, a teasing graze that sent a shiver up his arm. Before Jax could deflect, a commotion erupted at the chamber's entrance. Dravik, the hulking Zarathian with his chitinous exoskeleton and 4 bristling arms, bellowed in protest, his voice shaking the walls. This is an outrage. The molecular disruptor is standard for my rank. His red eyes glared at Magistrate Clyon, who stood impassive, his translucent skin a stern yellow. The rules are clear, Clyon replied coolly. No disintegration weapons in direct combat trials. The risk to spectators is too great. Jax's attention shifted as Ambassador Damien Voss slipped into a hushed exchange with one of Clyon's aides. A discreet flash of credits passed hands, masked as a ceremonial gesture. Your diplomat's busy, Vera murmured, her ears twitching as she followed Jax's gaze. Politics as usual, Jax said, though his instincts sharpened. Voss's moves were growing bolder and less subtle. Contestants, prepare for entry, a tournament official barked. Combat trials commence in 5 minutes. Vera lingered, her voice dropping to a private whisper. A word of advice, human. The gravity switches favored the right quadrant during last night's maintenance. The texts were sloppy. Her golden eyes gleamed with something unreadable, challenge or invitation. Jax studied her, surprised by the tip. Why tell me? She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. Maybe I want a real fight. Or maybe I'm curious what you can do when pushed. With that, she strode to her gate, leaving Jax with a distinct sense he'd been baited and tempted. The arena had morphed into a labyrinth of shifting platforms and gravity zones, holographic barriers defining a battlefield strewn with weapons caches and hazards. Clyon's voice echoed overhead. Today's trial pits our champions in direct combat. Victory by incapacitation or forcing your opponent out of bounds. Lethal force is permitted, but discouraged. The crowd roared as Jax and Vera stepped onto their marks, announced as the first pairing. Cheers for Vera mingled with curious murmurs about the human who'd survived this far. The platforms hummed beneath their feet, gravity fluctuating in waves. Vera's axe ignited with a sharp crack, her stance radiating power. Jax twirled his baton, its but a faint counterpoint, his posture loose but ready. Begin, Clyon shouted. Vera charged, a silver blur, her axe slashing down with lethal precision. Jax dodged, the blade grazing his shoulder, sparks flying as he rolled into a lighter gravity zone. He countered with a clumsy swing, deliberately off balance, letting her drive him back. The crowd laughed, but Vera's eyes narrowed. She wasn't fooled. She leapt, using a gravity shift to arc overhead, and Jax stumbled in her landing, their bodies colliding. Her chest pressed against his through her armor, the sudden softness jolting him as he caught her waist to steady them both. Her breath hitched, her claws grazing his arm as she pushed off, her purr a low growl. Sloppy human. Lucky, he grinned, disengaging with a stagger. Their dance continued. Vera strikes a whirlwind. Jax's dodges a mix of skill and feigned panic. Then chaos erupted. Dravik, eliminated earlier, stormed the arena's edge, roaring about sabotage. They've rigged this. The human and Zillerin are conspiring. Hollow feeds flared with intercepted transmissions, grainy clips of Jax and Vera in the swamp, their alliance twisted into damning evidence. Clyon's eyes shifted to a furious red. Siskumba, contestants to holding chambers now. Guards swarmed, separating Jax and Vera with cold efficiency. Her gaze met his as they were dragged apart, confusion, then a flash of hurt in her golden eyes. Jax's stomach twisted, but he kept his mask intact, letting them haul him away. The interrogation chamber was a sterile box, its walls pulsing with monitoring tech. Jax sat shackled to a chair, his combat suit streaked with sweat and dust. A faceless voice crackled through a speaker. "You've been collaborating with a Zilleran beyond the rules. Evidence shows you planned this from the start." "Evidence can be faked," Jax said, his tone calm despite the tightening cuffs. A holoscreen flickered, projecting Vera's voice, distorted but clear. "The human's a tool, nothing more. I used him to secure my lead." The word stung, though Jax's gut screamed forgery. The voice pressed on. "She never cared, Ryder. You were a pawn to her ambition." He clenched his fists, knuckles whitening, but his face stayed stone. "Sounds like her," he lied, buying time. The truth gnawed at him. Someone wanted them divided, and Voss's shadow loomed large. In a parallel chamber, Vera faced her own torment. Her wrists were bound, her exoskeleton stripped away, leaving her in the bodysuit that clung to her silver skin. A cold voice droned. "The human betrayed you." "Look," a hollow played, Jax laughing, mocking her as a gullible cat too easy to play. Her fist slammed the table, cracking its surface, her markings flaring crimson. "Lies," she snarled, but doubt flickered in her eyes, a rare crack in her armor. Tears welled, quickly blinked away. She'd trusted him, and now this. Hours bled by, isolation fueling anger and despair. When they were finally shoved back into the arena for a forced rematch, the tension was a live wire. The crowd bayed for blood, the stakes impossibly high. Elimination or victory, no middle ground. Vera's axe blazed as she charged, her strikes wild with betrayal's fury. Jax parried, his baton sparking, his movements sharper than before. She lunged, pinning him against the platform, her body crashing into his. Her chest pressed hard against his, her breath hot on his face as she raised her axe, eyes wild with pain. "You played me," she hissed, voice breaking. Jax caught her wrist, their bodies locked in a trembling stalemate. "I didn't," he said, low and fierce, his gray eyes boring into hers. "They're lying to us both." Mid-strike, something shifted. Her axe faltered, her gaze softening as a memory surfaced. The way he dodged in the swamp, precise and selfless. Her weapon lowered an inch, trembling. "Stop," she whispered, the word cutting through the arena's clamor. "They've deceived us." The crowd fell silent, stunned as their weapons dropped. Jax stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm, a steadying touch that lingered on her silver skin. "We're not the enemy," he said, voice raw. "Someone else is." Vera's ears twitched, her markings dimming to a conflicted glow. "Then who?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Before he could answer, Voss's voice cut through the comms, cold and commanding. "Enough. Resume or be disqualified." But the seed was planted. Jax and Vera stood together, weapons at their sides, hearts pounding with a shared realization. The true fight wasn't here, but beyond the arena's walls, where unseen hands pulled strings. The crowd's hush turned to murmurs, sensing a shift bigger than the trial itself. The galactic arena hung in a breathless hush, the crowd's murmurs rippling like a restless tide as Jax and Jax, Ryder and Vera of Zalara, stood frozen, their weapons lowered, their gazes locked. Her silver skin gleamed under the shifting lights, her golden eyes flickering with a storm of emotions, doubt, fury, and a fragile spark of trust reignited by his words. Jax's gray eyes held steady, his shock baton dangling at his side, his chest still heaving from their clash. The air between them crackled, thick with the weight of their unspoken alliance and the defiance that had just taken root. Ambassador Damien Voss's voice sliced through the comms again, sharp and commanding. "Résumé combat, hors phase disqualification." His silver hair glinted in the diplomatic box, his icy blue eyes narrowed with barely concealed rage. Vera's ears twitched, her markings pulsing a conflicted amber. She glanced at Jax, her axe trembling in her grip, then back at the elevated platform where Magistrate Clyon watched, his translucent skin shifting to an uncertain orange. "They're forcing our hands," she muttered, her voice low enough for only Jax to hear. "But I won't be their puppet." "Neither will I," Jax replied, his tone firm but quiet. He stepped closer, his arm brushing hers, the brief contact sending a shiver through him as her warmth seeped through the bodysuit. "We end this their way, or we end it ours." Her lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile, her canines glinting. "Ours, then." Before Clyon could enforce Voss's order, a roar erupted from the arena's edge. Dravik, the Zarathian brute, shoved past the guards, his four arms flexing as his chitinous exoskeleton bristled. "They've cheated us all," he bellowed, his red eyes blazing. The human and Zilliron rigged this farce together. The crowd surged, their cheers turning to shouts of confusion and outrage as holoscreens flared with the same fabricated footage Dravik had unleashed earlier. Jax and Vera in the swamp, their alliance twisted into treachery. Clyon raised a hand, his voice booming. "Silence. The trial resumes now." The platforms shifted beneath their feet, gravity fluctuating as the arena reset for combat. Jax and Vera exchanged a glance, a silent pact forming in the chaos. They play the game, but on their terms. She spun her axe, its blue energy crackling, and charged. Not at Jax, but at a weapons cache near the right quadrant, where she'd tipped him about the gravity quirks. Jax followed, his baton sparking, his steps deliberate but feigned with stumbles for the cameras. The crowd roared as they clashed near the cache, their movements a choreographed dance of deception. Vera swung her axe wide, missing Jax by inches as he ducked, rolling into her path. Their bodies collided, his chest pressing against hers through the armor, the sudden softness beneath the exoskeleton catching him off guard. She smirked, shoving him back with a playful growl. "Keep up, human," she teased, her purr low and teasing as she grabbed a concussive grenade from the cache. Trying, he shot back, snagging a shield module and activating it just as she tossed the grenade skyward. It exploded in a blinding flash, masking their next move. To the audience, it looked like a fierce exchange, Vera dominating, Jax scrambling. But every strike, every dodge, was rehearsed in the split-second glances they shared, building towards something bigger. Dravik stormed into the fray, his four arms wielding twin blades and a plasma whip. "I'll end you both," he roared, lunging at Vera. She parried, her axe meeting his whip in a shower of sparks, but the Zarathian's sheer mass drove her back. Jax darted in, his baton slamming into Dravik's knee joint, a weak spot he'd clocked in the footage. The brute stumbled, roaring, and Vera seized the moment, flipping over him with feline agility to land beside Jax. Their shoulders brushed as they faced Dravik together, her hip grazing his in the tight space. The contact was fleeting, but the heat of her body lingered, stirring a pulse of distraction Jax quickly buried. "He's a problem," she muttered, her breath close to his ear. "Let's make him someone else's," Jax replied, nodding toward the shifting platforms. They baited Dravik, weaving through the gravity zones with synchronized steps, Vera leaping high in the lighter fields, Jax ducking low in the heavier ones. The Zarathian charged, his whip lashing out, but a sudden gravity spike pinned him mid-step, leaving him vulnerable. Vera's axe sliced through his whip, and Jax's baton cracked against his chest plate, sending him sprawling out of bounds. The crowd erupted, half in awe, half in fury, as Dravik was hauled away. But the victory was short-lived. Clyon's voice cut through the noise, now a furious red. "Enough disruption. Champions, face each other. Final elimination." Jax and Vera turned, their eyes locking with a mix of resolve and regret. The platforms stabilized, gravity settling into a steady hum as the arena focused on them. She raised her axe, its glow reflecting in her golden eyes, and Jax gripped his baton, its sparks faint against her brilliance. "We can't stall forever," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know," he replied, stepping into a defensive stance. "But we don't have to play their game." She nodded, and they lunged, axe meeting baton in a clash that rang through the arena. To the crowd, it was a brutal duel, Vera's strength overwhelming Jax's desperate blocks. But every move was calculated, A feint here, a glancing blow there, designed to keep them in the fight without ending it. She swung low, and Jax sidestepped, his arm brushing her waist as he spun behind her. Her tail flicked, grazing his thigh, a subtle tease that made him smirk despite the stakes. "Nice try," he muttered, ducking her next swing. "You're not bad yourself," she purred, her ears twitching as she pressed closer, their bodies nearly flush in the tight dance of combat. Her chest grazed his arm through the armor, the brief softness sending a jolt through him, but he masked it with a stumble, letting her force him back. The crowd cheered, enthralled by the spectacle, but Voss's voice crackled through the comms again, sharper now. "Finish it, Ryder, or face consequences beyond this arena." Jax's jaw tightened. Voss's threats were no bluff. Earth's leverage hung over him like a blade. He glanced at Vera, catching the flicker of strain in her eyes. She felt her own pressure, Zalara's expectations weighing heavy. They circled each other, weapons poised, when Jax signaled with a subtle tilt of his head. She caught it, her markings flaring briefly, and they moved as one. In perfect sync, they executed a sequence they'd improvised in the swamp's steam, Vera spinning high, Jax sliding low. Her axe grazed his shield, sparking for show, while he tripped into her, his hands catching her hips to steady them. The firm curve beneath his fingers sent a rush through him, and her breath hitched, her golden eyes locking on his with a mix of surprise and heat. "Careful," she whispered, her purr a velvet edge. "Always," he grinned, releasing her as they broke apart, turning to face the real target. Beneath Vera's armor, a hidden data core hummed, evidence they'd pieced together in stolen moments, snippets of intercepted comms and Voss's shady deals. With a flick of her wrist, she activated it, and Jax tossed a concussive charge skyward as cover. The explosion lit the arena, and the data core's signal hijacked every holoscreen. Files flooded the displays, recordings of Voss bribing officials, the contest administrator rigging outcomes, plans to seize Zalara's resources under the guise of victory. The crowd's roar turned to chaos, gasps and shouts drowning out Clyon's attempts to regain control. "What is this?" he demanded, his skin flashing crimson. Voss's face twisted with rage from the box, his voice barking orders that went unheard. "Cut the feeds. Now!" But it was too late. The truth blazed across the 5 systems, corruption exposed in real time. Jax and Vera stood back to back, their weapons lowered, their breathing synced as the arena trembled with the weight of their revelation. The crowd's fury swelled, a groundswell of outrage overtaking the bloodlust. Dravik's earlier rage now seemed petty against this betrayal. Guards hesitated, unsure who to restrain, as the administrator's aides scrambled to flee. Jax turned to Vera, his hand brushing her arm, a steadying touch amid the storm. "We did it," he said, voice low. "Not yet," she replied, her golden eyes fierce. "This is just the start." Jax nodded, his gray eyes scanning the arena, guards hesitating at the edges, Clyon's platform trembling as his aides scrambled, Voss's silhouette rigid with rage in the diplomatic box. "They'll try to bury this," he said, his tone steady despite the chaos. "We need to lock it down." Vera's ears twitched, her markings flaring a determined amber. She tapped a hidden panel on her exoskeleton's wrist, and a faint hum pulsed through the air, barely audible but potent. "Already on it," she replied, her purr returning with a sharp edge. "Zillaran Tech. Our armor doubles as a resonance network. Every move, every word since the swamp's been synced to my people's lattice. They're broadcasting it now, beyond this arena." Jax's brows lifted, a flicker of admiration breaking through his mask. "You've been playing a longer game than I thought." "Survival's not enough," she said, stepping closer, her hip brushing his in the tight space. The contact was brief, but the firmness beneath her armor sent a jolt through him, a distraction he quickly shoved aside. Zalara's been prey to these schemes too long. This ends today. Before he could respond, a squad of enforcers stormed the arena floor, their energy lances crackling as they closed in. "Contestants, stand down," one barked, his voice amplified through a helmet. "You're under arrest for tampering with the trial." The crowd's roar shifted. Some cheered the guards, others jeered, a schism forming in the stands. Jax tightened his grip on his shock baton, its faint buzz a lifeline, while Vera's axe reignited with a sharp crack, blue energy flaring along its edge. "They're Voss's," Jax muttered, recognizing the insignia. "He's doubling down." "Then we triple it," Vera shot back, her smile fierce. She lunged, her movements a blur of silver and purple, axe slicing through a lance's haft before the guard could fire. Jax followed, his baton cracking against another's armor, sparks flying as he drove the enforcer back. They fought as a unit, her agility weaving through his precision. Vera leaping high, Jax striking low, their bodies brushing in the fray. Once, she spun past him, her chest grazing his arm through the exoskeleton, the sudden softness making his breath catch. She smirked, catching his eye mid-fight. "Focus, human." "Hard not to," he grinned, ducking a lance thrust. The enforcers fell back, overwhelmed by their synchronicity, but the real threat loomed above. Voss's voice thundered through the comms, cutting through the melee. "Enough! Activate the override. End this now." A low rumble shook the arena, the platforms tilting as gravity spiked unpredictably. Jax staggered, catching Vera's arm to steady them both, his hand sliding to her waist, fingers pressing into the curve of her hip. Her golden eyes met his, a flicker of heat passing between them before she pulled free, her axe raised. "He's locking the systems," she said, her voice taut. "We need to finish this." Jax nodded, spotting a control node near Clyon's platform, a glowing terminal pulsing with the arena's power. "There," he said, pointing. "If we fry that, the feeds stay alive." They sprinted, dodging collapsing platforms and stray energy blasts from the retreating guards. Vera vaulted over a gap, her braid whipping behind her, and Jax followed, his concussive charge ready. As they reached the node, she covered him, her axe deflecting a drone's pulse while he slammed the charge into the terminal. It sparked, then erupted in a shower of light, locking the hollow screens on the broadcast, Voss's treachery frozen for all to see. The crowd's fury peaked, chants of justice echoing through the stands. Clyon's skin flashed crimson, his voice lost in the uproar as he gestured wildly at his aides. Voss leapt from the box, shoving through panicked officials, but the arena security turned on him, some loyal to the 5 systems, not as bribes. Hands seized his silver cloak, dragging him back as he shouted threats that dissolved into the noise. Jax and Vera stood amidst the wreckage, their weapons lowered, the air thick with dust and triumph. She turned to him, her markings dimming to a warm glow, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "We did it," she said, her voice softer now, almost reverent. Jax met her gaze, a rare grin breaking through his reserve. "Yeah, you and that fancy Zillerin tech." She laughed, a musical sound that cut through the chaos, and stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. The touch lingered, her fingers brushing his skin through the torn sleeve, sending a shiver up his spine. "It's more than tech," she said, her purr low and intimate. "It's us." For a moment, the arena faded, the crowd, the guards, the shattered platforms, all drowned out by the heat in her golden eyes. Jax's hand hovered near her waist, tempted to pull her closer, but a shout snapped them back. Dravik, freed from the sidelines, charged with his salvage blade, his red eyes wild with vengeance. "You'll pay for this." Vera spun, her axe meeting his strike in a blaze of sparks, but Dravik's mass drove her back. Jax darted in, his baton cracking against the Zorathian's flank, drawing a roar of pain. Together, they pressed him, Vera slashing high, Jax striking low, until a final blow from her axe sent him crashing out of bounds, his blade clattering away. The crowd's cheers surged anew, a tidal wave of approval washing over them. Jax and Vera stood side by side, their breathing ragged, their bodies close enough to feel the heat radiating between them. She sheathed her axe, turning to him with a look that mixed relief and something deeper, defiance, gratitude, and a spark of unspoken promise. "They'll come for us now," she said, her voice steady. "Zalara, Earth, everyone with a stake. Let them." Jax replied, his tone firm. "We've got the truth, and each other." Her ears twitched, her smile widening as she clasped his forearm in a warrior's grip, her fingers strong and warm. "A good start," she said, her thumb brushing his wrist, a fleeting tease that left him wanting more. Above, Clyon regained control, his voice strained but authoritative. "The trial is suspended. Investigations will follow." The crowd's roar drowned him out, a mix of triumph and demand for justice rippling through the five systems. As guards swarmed to secure the arena, Jax and Vera slipped to a shadowed edge, catching their breath. The fight was won, but the war loomed. Voss's allies, Zalara's enemies, Earth's agendas. Yet in that moment, with her silver skin pressed lightly against his side, her scent filling his senses, Jax felt a certainty settle in. They'd face it together, human and Zillaran, a bond forged in battle and sealed in truth. The galactic arena's clamor faded to a dull roar as Jax and Jax, Ryder and Vera of Zalara slipped into the shadowed alcove, their breaths still heavy from the fight. Dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of scorched metal and the faint spice of Vera's presence, a scent that had become as familiar to Jax as his own heartbeat. Her silver skin pressed lightly against his side, her warmth seeping through the torn fabric of his combat suit, a quiet anchor in the storm they'd just unleashed. Above them, the holoscreens flickered with the last echoes of Voss's downfall, the crowd's chants of justice reverberating through the stands like a victory hymn. Vera's golden eyes flicked to Jax, her markings settling into a steady, warm glow, a stark contrast to the crimson fury they'd blazed moments ago. "They'll come for us now," she'd said, and the truth of it lingered between them. The arena might have crowned them heroes for the moment, but beyond its walls, enemies stirred. Zillaran rivals hungry for power, Earth's shadow players who'd backed Voss, and the five systems bureaucrats scrambling to save face. "Let them," Jax had replied, and he meant it. His hand rested on her arm, fingers brushing her silver skin, the contact grounding him as the adrenaline ebbed. She didn't pull away, her tail flicking lightly against his leg, a teasing graze that sent a spark through him, though he masked it with a faint grin. "We've got the truth, and each other." Her ears twitched, her smile widening, revealing sharp canines that glinted in the dim light. "A good start," she said, her purr low and intimate as she clasped his forearm in a warrior's grip. Her thumb brushed his wrist, a fleeting tease that lingered in his senses, promising more than words could carry. The moment shattered as Magistrate Clyon's voice cut through the comms, strained but resolute. "Order is restored. Champions, report to the upper concourse for debriefing." Guards swarmed the arena floor, their movements less hostile now, guiding dazed officials and restraining the last of Voss's loyalists. Dravik's unconscious form was hauled away, his threats silenced by their combined might. Jax and Vera stepped from the alcove, their shoulders brushing as they climbed the concourse steps, the crowd parting with a mix of awe and curiosity. Her exoskeleton hummed faintly, its resonance network still active, a silent guardian broadcasting their victory to Zalara and beyond. At the concourse's edge, a panoramic viewport stretched across the station, revealing the starry void and the faint outline of Zalara's twin moons, a sight that stirred something in Jax, a reminder of how far he'd come from Earth's gritty battlefields. Elder Sarks awaited them, her flowing robes stark against the concourse's sleek design. The Zillaran matriarch's silver eyes mirrored Vera's, though etched with age and wisdom. "You've done more than win a trial, child," she said, her voice a melodic rasp. "You've exposed a rot that threatened us all." Vera bowed her head slightly, a rare deference. "Not alone, Elder. The human." "Jackson of Earth," Sarks interjected, her gaze shifting to him, sharp and appraising. Your role in this is unexpected. Zalara owes you a debt. No debt, Jax said, his tone firm but respectful. Just a chance to keep the scales balanced. Earth got its own mess to clean up. Voss was a symptom, not the disease. Sarx's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking her stern facade. A diplomat's words from a warrior's mouth. Curious. She turned to Vera. You intend to stay with him? Vera's ears flicked back, her markings flaring briefly. Not with him beside him. For now. Zalara's safe today, but tomorrow's another fight. And Earth. Jax prompted, catching her eye. You'd leave your moons for my dust ball. She stepped closer, her chest brushing his through the exoskeleton. A fleeting, electric contact that made his pulse jump. I'd leave them to fight with someone who sees beyond the game, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. And maybe to explore what else your kind can offer. Jax's grin widened, a spark of heat in his gray eyes matching the gold in hers. Plenty to explore, he murmured, his hand hovering near her waist before he pulled back, mindful of Sarx's watchful gaze. A soft chime interrupted them, a secure transmission pulsing through Jax's subdermal receiver. He stepped aside, pressing a finger to his ear as Earth Command's voice crackled through. Report, Ryder. The feeds are chaos. Voss's allies are scrambling. Mission accomplished, Jax replied, his tone clipped. Conspiracy's public, Zilliran Tech locked it in. I've secured an asset. Vera of Zalara. She's with us. A pause, then new orders protect Zilliran interests. Threats inbound, origin unclear. You're our liaison now. Understood, Jax said, cutting the line. He turned back to Vera, who tilted her head, catching the shift in his expression. Earth's got a new job for me, keeping your world safe. Her smile turned sly, her tail flicking against his leg again, a deliberate tease this time. Then I'll keep you safe while you do it, she said, her purr rich with promise. You've much to learn about Zalara and me. Sarx cleared her throat, her silver eyes twinkling with amusement. I'll leave you to your arrangements. Zalara expects a full report, Vera. Don't linger too long. As the elder departed, Jax and Vera moved to the viewport, their hands brushing as they leaned against the railing. The stars stretched endless before them, a canvas of possibility. Your tech, our grit, Jax said, glancing at her. Not a bad combo. Not bad at all, she agreed, her shoulder pressing against his, her warmth a steady presence. First stop, Zalara. First stop, he nodded, his voice softening. Then wherever this takes us. She turned to face him fully, her golden eyes locking on his, her chest grazing his arm through the armor, a subtle, lingering touch that spoke louder than words. You've still got secrets, Jackson of Earth, she murmured, her purr of velvet thread. I'll enjoy uncovering them. And I'll enjoy watching you try, he shot back, his grin matching hers as they stood together, the void beyond a promise of battles and bonds yet to come. Their shuttle awaited, a sleek Zilliran craft humming with the same resonance tech that had won the day. As they boarded, hands clasped in a final, firm grip, the engines flared, carrying them from the arena's chaos into the unknown. Partners forged in fire, ready for whatever lay ahead.